Alrighty, we get started for tonight. This is our final Thursday. Well, no, second to last Thursday. Next Thursday is going to be a little weird. It's part of what opening notes are about. There is another assignment, but it is going to change from what you've looked at. So it's not going to be the Tech Jobs Persistent. Chris changed that at 3 o'clock this afternoon. It's going to be the assignment portion of what you would turn in is going to be the completion of the studios, the next 3 studios that we have. So it's going to be the Tech Jobs Persistent studio we've been working on. The Cheese NBC studio. We'll have a studio tonight that will start to add, actually that was the prep work. So we did the prep work, added the cheese and descriptions to the entity framework. What the assignment is going to be is completing the studio tonight and the studio Monday. And then there's a little bit also next Thursday, but the assignment you'll have plenty of time to work on in class and afterwards if you want to, but it's going to be completing that studio. Chris audibled the assignment because it was a bit too much work right at the end of the class, and it wasn't realistic for people to be able to finish what the assignment was going to be in a week. So that's why he pulled it out. The other reason is once the Unit 4 stuff actually gets finalized, the hope is that by doing the studios, the 1, 2, and 3 studios as the assignment, you'll have the sort of knowledge and tools to start on your project in Unit 4 to work forward there. So the studios will help set up more of the models and database pieces as we work through the studios. And I'll talk about that more once we actually get into the lecture portion. Does anyone have any question on the assignment? There is one due tonight. Technically it was due 36 minutes ago. Are there any questions on that before we get to the starter questions? This is awful.
The assignment that's been canceled, if we were just interested in looking over it to see if we could do it anyway, is it posted or?
Yes, it's still out there. I don't think Chris has changed it. So it's still technically posted. So I think you can find it, but it's not required. It should be on the, where's that?
There was a page that had a list of large assignments there.
Yeah. Oh, he got it officially updated. You may not be able to find it. Yep, he got it all updated in the last hour, actually. So no, you won't be able to find it. If you had gone to it an hour ago, yes. But it is effectively, from an implementation standpoint, the same as the studios. It's just all brand new code instead of working on the Cheese NBC that already exists. All right, we can start on those starter questions. Does anybody want to volunteer? You can break into your groups if you want.
I'll just leave it for the entire stuff. Okay?
I am indifferent.
What?
Okay.
Does anyone want to volunteer to be the question giver?
I'll be the, do you want everybody to answer?
Yeah.
Because I set up the.
Sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. I said I was volunteering to lead the questions.
Oh, there we go.
Maybe that I wasn't clear.
I misunderstood.
Yeah, I can just do like the back end of like people submitting their answers. Do you want to do that way or?
Yes, that would be awesome.
Okay, and you can So that one. It's the same, it's the same link as last time, which is. Okay,
You sent that on the Slack channel.
yeah,
Okay.
on the Hello Casey.
So to reiterate, if you want to answer questions rather than having shouting out answers, which is what I've done in my group, go to Hello Casey in Slack, and there's a link where you can put some of the answers that you come up with, submit them there and pull up there. So the first question is, did you get the entity framework set up to work? That would have been the first part of the prep work. I think that part was an article. Please respond yes or no.
And then the second link is the, what people have answered,
Is there an invisible channel? Oh, I found it. Is that right?
yeah, it should go. Is it not going? No. Okay, let me redo that. Okay, try it now. Is it going? You just refresh the page. Nope. Oh, maybe click open or join broadcast.
It's not clickable.
No, okay. I'll just send you the links to the answers. How about that? Oh, Gary, can you open up that link I sent you?
Okay, so 12 answers, let's see, we probably have about half of people responding. A good number of yeses and some no's. Does anyone who had no want to talk about it, or would you like to do that for? The overall, please feel free to jump in if anything. Okay, second question. What is an ORM? and you will accept what it's used for, but even better, you explain what an ORM is. Object relational number, that's an answer. Who wants to put in for their answer a little bit about what ORM is? We're using a data layer to communicate the object to a database. We can interact with a relational database. All those are good answers. It's a way to map object-oriented principles to a database. And it's a way to put and represent classes of data. Guys. Manages the data transfers, changes, uses between the program and the database. That's also good. Okay, third question. How does an object instance relate to a database via an ORM? So if you think about the hint here is to think what is an object instance and how what does an instance relate back to the database? Might be helpful to think of examples of the instances we have with our prep work. So an example of the instance in the cheese in PC would be just one of your cheeses. Whether that was cheddar, Gouda. Object instance is represented by a row in the table of the database. That is fairly ideal. Basically, one object, one row, or one object instance.
It's a bit of an oversimplification, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, well, I guess you could say, so when we talked about the one-to-many relationship, if we had cheddar object, technically it would be one row per one table. So it really depends on the database you have behind your website. But it is still, in general, an instance would be related to a row. In this case, it would be a row on the cheeses table and a row on the categories table. But really, if you add a cheese and you've already added that category, so if you have cheddar and you have cheddar with a heart that has a category heart, if you add another cheese that still has a category heart, you're still only adding one row just to the cheeses table. If it still shares that same category, you don't have to add. The whole idea of the database is you don't have to add the text part for every row because it's got that relational ID that ties down to the category. Okay. What is CRUD? And please feel free to go into detail.
Let's get it on your shoe and you just scrape it off.
CRUD is a pretty standard term, it's not specific to this one language or this one database. You'll find that it's common between almost all databases. That looks right to me. So if you were to Google that, you'd probably get the same answer. Create, update, and delete. And that has to do with interacting with the database. That's the most common operations we execute. It's the operations performed. Okay, next question. what is a primary key? If you could, it would be helpful too, if you'd like to get an example from Chief of DC. What did we call, what did we call primary key? Right, I'll clarify. Yeah, so I'm seeing unique identifier. It is important to know unique. In Chief and DC, it was Chief ID. But yes, typically it's the unique ID for that specific table, so it's usually a column in the table. So if you think about a cheese object, if you extrapolated it beyond what we did in our prep work, and you said a cheese has 10 characters, maybe one of them was category, maybe one of them was added to the database. Maybe one of them would be another category. Is it holy or not, like Swiss cheese? If you had columns for each of those attributes, you'd still only have the one column of the cheese table as your primary key. So it's a unique column in a database for identifying data. So think of it as that column title. And then related to that idea, what is a foreign key?
A key with an accent,
Sorry?
a key with an accent,
Something like that.
But
And what was our, I guess if you want to add this to your example, you're trying to put it in there. What was our example of a foreign key? And to be a foreign key, you have to say where it was located to. In the sheet of these Yep, so reference to the unique identifier for another table, so this category ID, that's exactly right. It's a key that links to a unique row in a different table. Yep. So in the cheese table, category ID is a foreign key. If you go over to the category table, then the category ID is now the primary key in that table. So it's entirely dependent on which table you're looking at the time. But it's foreign when you're looking at it in a table it doesn't primarily belong to, if that makes sense. So when you're looking at the cheese table, category ID is a foreign key because it's unique, but over in a different table somewhere. So a call for referencing other data with a database table, and you can think of it as a map from one table to another, relating one row of data to another. And when you have that, you can start to have one-to-many relationships, like when you have multiple different types of genes that all have the same category. Which I kind of just gave me the last question, I didn't see it. What is a one-to-many relationship? Case where values found in many places, that's pretty close. Yep. You have like a category table that can be related to many rows in another table, such as the cheese table. That's exactly right. And so you can find one-to-many relationships in lots of different places. the example that they did, they may have referenced it in the videos, I don't remember, is one book, not always, but typically has one author, but an author may have a number of books they've written across their career, so that would be another good example of a one-to-many relationship. The last two questions. What is a DB context? Or how is it used in the prep to a good way to talk about it? So here we have an object used to connect to a database. It manages the relationship between the program and the database. I forgot. But yes, it's you create the DB context that allows you to interact with the database. And calling it an instance of the database is not far off. I don't know all the technical terms, but yes, it's how you interact with it. And then the corresponding idea behind that is what do you have to do to, or what is a migration? How did that play into the whole DB context? And for bonus points, if anyone remembers what database that was used. Do that now. So we have a couple of different answers. A migration is sets up the database to hold data. Even with the context, we still have to set, or excuse me, the DB context, we still have to set the database up to receive information for the first time. And it was when they had you create the initial migration, you remember that, and then you actually did the command in PowerShell to update the database right after that. But very good. I saw it when it came on the screen, but somebody had the right database name that SQL Server is still on there. It was SQL Server, and they mentioned that one. It was the way you got the server set up. There was a line that they had you add word for word in the JSON settings file. And that was where it indicated what a server, or excuse me, what database you're using and what you're calling your particular database. So I know when I was trying to follow all the videos, I would use the commands, and then maybe I would jump around in the video. And I found that sometimes it's just easier to rename the database than it is to try to update it. Your mileage will vary. But it's good to know kind of what's happening behind the scenes. So it's type of database is SQL Server. You would have given it the name that they had that was indicated in that one line. They had you insert in JSON settings. You can go and change that if you wanted to. That was indicated in the notes under the second to last video. So if you're struggling with that later on, I recommend you go ahead and look at those. It gives you a lot of information in the comments where you don't have to necessarily go back to the video, which I always appreciate. So that should be all the questions.
Oh, there's one more.
Oh, there is?
Anything specific that
Bonus question. Oh. Work out. If it gets too cold in here, let me know. I changed the temperature. It actually is lowering. I was very hot.
So I still prefer regular. Yeah. It does, it's not good. And it really, there are some things that are going to. And that's really good.
But other than that, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, like navigating the website for mountains. This was right here is with that's something there.
It's not as large as I wanted it to be. All right, we will get started for tonight. So we'll go over the studio solution first. Well, a possible studio solution. My retinas will be burned out by the sun. And then I'm going to go over the MVC cheese example that was in the reading. I'm going to walk through it a little more, explain a bit more what the entity framework does and how it sort of connects stuff together. And then after walking through that, I'm going to show you the more sort of complex use case that shows some of the one-to-many relationships, the different relationships you can get out of the database by using the, Chris covered it very briefly in the assignment where you can say, go create new MVC application and you can tell it to use authorization. I'm going to do that and walk through some of that code so that you can see how the models relate. But the first thing will be showing a solution for the studio. Reminder for everyone on the studio. So we have a file that has a bunch of cities and city data in it. And our goal is to make it possible for us to sort the data in various different ways. We want to be able to sort it essentially by every column in our data. So I ran the program. What it has by default, the first sorter helps if you open the right file. So what we want to do is print out the cities in each different way that we can sort them. And if we look at the program running once, the sorter that it comes with is one that sorts by name of a city, but we then also want to allow sorting by our other possible values, which are state, population, and area. And let me know if this text isn't big enough, if you would like it to be larger, and if you would like the color to change, because I can actually see everyone in the reflection. So the name comparer works fairly simply. You start with the first one, compare it to the next one, and return, taking advantage of the compare that already exists for string. So we can use that. Sort of for planning what we can do, knowing which values we want to sort by, we can take a look at, we know we want to sort by state, population, and area. So we can figure out how we want to sort based on each one of those data types. And since string for state is the same as name, that's where we can start So we'll want to create a new comparer. So we'll call this comparer. Going to look very similar to the name comparer. So I'm going to copy everything in the name comparer file. And I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to rename this the state comparer. And it will still take a city because we're sorting cities. But instead of comparing name, we will compare state. If we want to verify this works, we can come over here. I suppose. Throw the state comparer in. So we can see our output from before was sorted by name. We'll run it again. And then we can see that now it is successfully sorting by state. Because we were able to mostly cheat and copy the implementation that was in the city. Sorry, the name comparer. Because it shared the same data type, it is almost the exact same, just uses a different attribute to sort on. If we covered, so there are ways you could implement this such that you could sort by different attributes, but in order to do that effectively, you would need to have use of generics. Since we haven't covered that, I won't show that example, but if you want to see an example of that later, I can show one, but I don't want to do that now. Because if you notice, the only difference between the state comparer and the name comparer is this dot state versus dot name, which is a lot of code redundancy between the two. And they do the exact same work. So if you notice that, yes, if we covered more in the language, that is not how we would implement those two. We'd sort of make it so you could sort by any of the fields more easily. But now we know we want to sort. So we have name and state. So we also want to sort by population. If I'm going too fast at all, let me know. I can try to slow down. So we can do the population comparer. Use the same I did before. Now it is no longer a string. So we can use the compare to. If it's taking me a little long, one of my eyes has sun on it some of the time and the other one doesn't. So now this should sort the cities by their population. So now if we come over here, we use the population comparer. We rerun. We'll notice the smallest populations are first. That's not what we wanted. So much like the example I showed on Monday, overriding that one comparer. What we really want is to compare the second argument to the first and use that so that we're sorting by largest first. And the reason that order is required is due to the way that compare to is implemented for the values, for the integers, since population is an integer. Yeah. So the way that these integers work, it mentions it here, is that if it is greater than, it returns a larger number, and that's what we want. So that's why the second one will come first, because if the second one is greater, we want it to come up further. So now if we rerun program, now our zero's on the bottom like we wanted it. And then our largest population of 8 million is at the top. I think that's 8 million.
Gonna change the comment?
What?
In the code, are you gonna change the comment?
Oh, should, yes. And if I change it, I'm just going to delete it.
That works.
That
But
is
I have nothing that has something wrong.
Yes. So that is actually a common problem that you'll see in code that you write or other people write, is they'll copy and paste, much like I did, change some stuff, but not update areas of the code that are functional. So like that comment at that point was superfluous and actually misguiding you if you were to read it. So that is something to pay attention to as you write code. I can't actually see it anymore. The other field that we need to sort by, the final one, area. So we'll want to implement an area comparer. Paste it in the same, and this will work. Same as the other one, actually. So got area, got compare to. We'll compare one city's area to the other, and depending on how those compare, put one first. So if we go over to our program, update this to use area comparer, come over here and run it. Then we sort them by the area. So then Jacksonville, Florida, apparently the largest one. In order to cover the entity framework parts, we're not going to do the compound comparer unless somebody really wants to do it. But I want to give you as much time at the end of class to be able to work on the studio and get ahead if you want to, but specifically start working on that studio at the end. Are there any questions on the implementation as it is here with the 3 different comparers? So there's one thing that is nice about having those interfaces. So the comparer interface, which just states that you create a compare method that returns an integer. One of the things that is nice about interfaces, specifically when you can sort of define your parameterized type and then take that type as your arguments, makes it a lot easier, as you can see, to create a bunch of code that you can then reuse. So now we have 4 different ways to sort our data, and the effort to do that was pretty easy comparatively to what we would have had to do in potentially other languages with if conditions and having to write that logic each time. Whereas when you have the interface, it sort of models how that code should be used. So then all you have to worry about is this one statement where you're returning the compared values. And when you go to use it, you use it the same everywhere because of the interface. So the advantage to the interface is you can use it everywhere the same, regardless of which one you had, which is why it was easy for us to go and change out which comparer we were using, get a different sort. It's one of the big advantages to having interfaces. It's easy to swap out different pieces and you don't have to go and update all of your code to do that or worry about it. So you can do similar things in Python as well. So what we covered before, downside is in Python, there's no types that you declare up front like this that are static, which means you could have a bunch of different ways to compare, but you have no interface or explicit type given. So in Python, I could go and just change this to a fake function, and then I could go run the code and we'd get a runtime exception. Whereas in C#, you get a compile time exception. It's actually a build time. So if I do a .NET run here, notices the code changed, and immediately tells me, oh, your code doesn't even build. Whereas Python, it would have ran the code and then went, oh, runtime exception. So it is one of the big advantages you get with the statically typed language, and especially with the interfaces, it makes it easier to refactor and switch your code out later, which is a big reason to use interfaces opposed to always using concrete types. If there are no questions, we'll move on to MVC cheese. Alrighty. But I'm gonna start MVC cheese. So much like you expect, it's still going to go and run like it does eventually once it starts. So I've already put some data in here. And if you notice, that's what the persistence gives you when you have a database. I went and started the app, and there was already data filled out. That is the reason to, one of the reasons to have persistence. So you don't always have to keep re-adding it. And just so you can see, it still works the same. You go to your different cheese categories and view the cheeses with just that category. You go and add new cheeses. Really don't know much about cheese, so most of this is probably inaccurate. Well, some of it's probably very true. So the way that this all works, so if you'll notice, so I checked out all of the code that Chris had, but a difference with running .NET MVC on the Mac versus on your Windows machine. So on the Windows machine, it uses SQL Server Community Edition. So it runs, and you have a little SQL Server Microsoft database there. That doesn't work on the Mac. So you actually have to swap out the database for another one called SQLite. But the code is all exactly the same. That's one of the really cool features of this entity framework, that you just write sort of code that looks like you're manipulating objects, and it goes and does stuff with the database behind the scenes. So the only thing that I actually needed to go and change, so if you are on a Mac, I had to come in here and update this to point to a different database location, because obviously the Windows file location is not going to work because not on a Windows machine. And then in all of the code, if you look at the previous code, this Entity Framework core refers to Entity Framework core dot SQL server. So in this case, we're using SQLite, which is a different database. It's a relational database still, but it is generally held in one file. And it can ship and be packaged inside of your code whenever it goes out, depending on how you decide to build out your code. But that's all I had to change. That's actually a lie. I had to change one other spot. So I changed this, the configuration. Sorry, I lied to you. Then over here in Pro Startup, and this was something that Chris covered very briefly, is in this Configure Services section. I changed this to say use SQLite instead of use SQL Server. That's all I changed, and then it used SQLite as the database instead of SQL Server. It's one of the huge bonuses of using an ORM and something like the Entity Framework. It automatically lets you swap out databases without you having to think about the different possible dialects between the relational databases, which you might think the syntax between them is the same, and it mostly is. But the advantage of the ORM is you don't have to worry about the cases where it's not the same, which will happen if you go to write a bunch of custom SQL, which I don't recommend if you can avoid it. And the rest of this code is the exact same. It goes to the default connection, which is defined in that file. You don't really need to worry about that because it sort of just comes out of the box. I would show you the database so you can see the schema like Chris showed you, and it's the same schema, but I can't find it. It's somewhere on this computer. I don't know where it is, but it's on here. And it has data in it because you can see it, but I can't find it. I've spent about 45 minutes trying to find it, and I can't. So I've given up at this point. But that's one of the cool things about the Entity Framework is it will just work. Now I don't know how to go and find that database right now, but the Entity Framework does make it work. So I don't have to worry about it not saving data or updating it. It's doing all of that correctly. I'm just apparently not skilled enough to find the file. For the other project that I'll cover in a little bit, I do know where that file is, so I can show you that schema, but I can't show you the one for the MVC, so I can't find it. And when I say schema, that is just a reference to the layout of the table. So we have all of our model classes in here. The schema, when I say schema, it's referring to the fact that we'll have a table called cheese that has these 4 columns in it. So earlier, I didn't want to be pedantic when we were talking about an instance of a class referring to one row. Most of the time that will be the case because technically what happens in the ORM is it is just referencing the ID, and then it dynamically under the covers goes and creates another instance of your category class. So the cheese category is an instance of that cheese category class, which is then an attribute for your cheese class. So the underlying schema, I can't show it to you. You end up with a table here that says cheese, and another table, it's cheese description. So we end up with that ID column, The other columns I can't remember the name of, and then the description ID, right?
Okay.
Category ID. Description is what you get to add. Category ID. So category, and we'll have the category ID over here, and that will point to a category that you've given a name. That's a name and an ID. You can have multiple rows here where they'll point, they all point to the same one. So in our case, we have the hard cheese. Its ID is actually 1. Then we could have other rows here that go and point to soft cheese. Got another one here, it could go point over to soft cheese. The key being the object relationship between the two is under the covers. Each one of your cheeses points over to a cheese category as a name and an ID. And then for you, there's a cheeses list property on your class that allows you under the covers to be able to go and say, all right, I'm going to grab this category, my hard category, and because it has an ID of 1, it knows to go and reference every cheese in our table over here. So this eraser is awesome. So over here, if we had a bunch of cheeses defined, we'll say this one was category 1, this is 2, 1. What that cheeses attribute does for you automatically, so this is where it goes into the ORM part, is it automatically comes in here and says, all right, I'm going to go over here and reference. It goes and creates a list. So we'll call this little sliver here our list. It goes and creates a list that is then made up of each one of those cheeses that has the ID of 1 for those hard cheeses. That's what this sort of what's referred to as reciprocal relationship is for. And that's why on the other page where we have the cheese, that's why when we go to the categories page and we click on hard, Jay will just go and grab the 3 hard cheeses we have. Because over here on cheese category, ooh,
Well, now that we're all awake.
it didn't matter. It's safe.
Made by Timex.
So those cheeses link back over to the individual cheese rows, and then those get automatically created into cheese instances for you, which are these guys. And each time, so you don't technically have to define the cheeses here, but what that means is you won't be able to just do .cheeses and get all your cheeses. So you have to define each direction of the relationship in order to be able to access them both ways. So then if we go and look at our controller, look at our cheese controller. So this part, I'll explain next time around how that sort of automatically gets set. So right here, this is using that link syntax, that language integrated query. Notice that it's only saying iList That's all it needs. It doesn't need anything more specific. Because all it's doing inside of the template is looping over the cheeses, which just needs iList, that interface. Then the cool part here of what the entity framework gives you, using the LINQ syntax, is it's able to say, all right, I want to go off my context, which is the DB context. So the DB context, as we've mentioned, is the part that connects to your database. It's your main object to interact directly with your database. And you need to use it anytime you're going to manipulate data in or out of your database. Then because we've set it up with the cheeses, we can go say, oh, include all the cheeses. And also, so get all the cheeses and include the category. That include says to go and fetch that other relationship. So that's what then goes and causes it to create the category objects. Then we do the to list. That's what gives you the list that you can then use in your view. Then similarly in our category, this is where what Chris had covered. We get a cheese category, we go off of our categories, and then we include all of the cheeses. And because we've declared that reciprocal relationship between cheese category and cheeses, that's why that include works. So because over here in category, we've defined that property cheeses. That's why here we're able to create this, other languages call them inline functions or lambda functions. I can't remember specifically if anyone else does.
Anonymous?
Anonymous is another way that they're referred to because they don't have a name. Cannot remember. C# has a very specific name for it. But this is actually a function that you're passing in. When you use this arrow syntax, it's passing in a function here whose first argument is category, and then it returns a category.cheeses. Because what happens in LINQ, which is what's getting used on the covers here, is each one of those methods requires a function to be passed to it. So if we hover over include, it goes and shows essentially a bunch of different ways that you can use it. But in all of these scenarios, it's passing, there we go, yeah, lambda expression. So we refer to a lambda expression. If you want to Google that, that is what it is referred to as. That's what the little fat arrow. It's also commonly called a fat arrow, by the way, that equal arrow. Because it has an extra line. Otherwise, just have one equal sign greater than fat arrow. Then notice the attribute here is uppercase ID. That's why here it says category.uppercase ID, and then it's equal to the ID that's getting passed in. So if we go and look at the URL, we can see that that's category /1. And by we, I mean just me, because that's tiny. If I paste it here, see that the address that it puts in is our cheese category, which corresponds to our action. And then the ID gets passed in as the first parameter. And then the alternative way that Chris showed here, and this is the two different ways you can go at getting the data. There's one, you can go from the cheeses themselves, or you can go from the category because we've created that relationship between the two. So this first option is using what I drew over here with the orange circle. The second option that he put in there and the way that this one works is it's going and saying, all right, I'm going to go and get all the cheeses with an ID of 1. So then it goes and grabs each one of these cheeses, sort of returns them out. And that's what the where does. And then at the same time it goes, oh, I want to go and include the category associated with these. So then it goes and hops over here and grabs the category, which is why for you as a developer writing it, either syntax is fine because you'll functionally get the same result. You'll get a list of cheeses, each with their categories. The difference is the direction in which it goes to grab the information. So this first one, where it says categories, include, and then only grab that single category, goes to the category table first, and then goes and grabs all of your cheeses. Whereas when you say context.cheeses, it goes to the cheeses table first, grabs all the cheeses, and then hops over to the category table. Generally, you likely won't care about the difference between the two. But if you were curious, that is the functional difference under the covers between the two syntaxes there of going and getting the information. Then we go and give it the title, as you can see here, and we go and pass that to the view. One part I did not show is here in this data folder. We have the cheese DB context. So this is the part that actually goes and lets you interact with the database and must be set up in order to work with the database at all. It inherits from the DB context class. So that class we had talked about at the very beginning in the starter questions. It's what allows you to go and communicate with the database. Why you have to go and implement your own subclass of the DB context is so that you can give your specific objects that you want to store in a database. When you do create objects, make sure that when you do your pluralizing of them, you do it correctly. Otherwise, you'll run into potential issues with the way that the data is getting accessed. So then here, when we go and set these two properties, we go and use dbSet. All dbSet does is essentially correspond to a table. And it will get the name of whatever your type is that you're creating in your database table. Then the same here with the category. Then right here, this constructor is overridden in what may appear to be a nonsense sort of way, because there's not anything really happening other than it's passing the options onto the parent constructor. What is not obvious at first necessarily is that it's very specifically saying that there are DB context options for the type cheeseDB context. The reason that is defined is so that it can actually instantiate, so create an instance of your database context. And it does that automatically whenever you hit your first page in the application. goes and creates an instance and lets you go and interact with the database. The reason this constructor needs to be declared is because right here, when you go and add that DB context and you give it the type, this options hash, also referred to as those sorts of things, but this function here that goes and gives options, that automatically gets passed through to that constructor. And if you didn't define that constructor, it will actually not work because it won't have, there won't be a constructor that accepts a CheeseDB context set of options. So that's why that constructor is needed, is it allows the final sort of locking in place pieces. So those options get passed in, and that's what actually allows it to connect to a database, SQLite or SQL Server, depending on which databases you have. Are there questions on the Cheese MVC example at all before I go into the more complex example that you can actually create yourself if you want to? I'm going to show you the command to create it on the Mac. I don't hear any questions. Okay, I do have it open here. I'm going to show you the Entity Framework example one because I already worked through that one. But if you wanted to go and create the code I'm about to show you, if you're on a Mac or you're using the command line client, this, which is required if you're on a Mac. Windows, you can use the command line client if you want to use the .NET commands. This goes and creates an MVC application, but it gives you user registration and user name, password, all of that sort of stuff that kind of default is on almost any website. It gives you that out of the box. It goes and generates all the code for you. And then you have users and authorization built into your website. Sorry, authentication and users built into your website. Authorization you have to implement yourself because you choose who has access to what. That's the difference between authentication and authorization. Authentication just means they're logged in. Authorization is what they have access to. So step one is authenticate, step two is authorize what they can do. So you run this command, or if you're in Visual Studio on your Windows desktop, if you click New Project, New MVC.NET application, it pops up that little wizard. I believe it's the second radio button that says Individual Authorization. You click that, then it goes and vomits out a bunch of code for you. So in our case, I just call it Entity Framework example. Suppose I could show the fake one that I just made, but I won't. So I didn't actually know how to get SQLite set up when I generated this Entity Framework example. It already had it set up, and this is probably why I can't find the database in the other one. So if we go and look at these, so here that has the same Entity Framework core definitions that the other one had. says it's going to use SQLite for the database.
That's you using 1.1.1.
Yes, I'm using the latest. I actually have been since, that's why my one example a few weeks ago completely broke and I had to fix it manually. I'm using a newer version of the .NET framework. The main difference is that it uses the, and some people mention this in Slack, it uses the CS project instead of JSON files for configuration. The reason .NET went to that for their MVC core is because all other .NET applications use this format for defining all of their settings. None of the other .NET that exists use JSON files. JSON being what this file looks like, much more common in existing .NET, C#, Visual Basic code, for it to be in this XML style, which looks a lot like HTML but has different element names. It allows for more structure. So JSON, as you can tell, is fairly structureless. It's just keys and values. Whereas over here in this entity framework example, you can go sort of nest it. You can name attributes. But that's the difference between what I'm using. So it says .NET Core App 1.1. I believe you're all using .NET Core App 1.0. There's not a big difference. The biggest difference between the two is the project files. So every time I check out anyone's code, I have to run a .NET migrate command, and it just changes the files over to this format here. So if you are using, if you go to use updated .NET, the 1.1, and you check out any of Chris's code, the first thing you need to do after you check it out is to run that .NET migrate. I actually did when I checked out that cities example. So the commands I ran through, I went and cloned these cities. That was in the old style of code. Not old, but in the 1.0 style of .NET. Then I went to the CD, made that was right, and I ran that .NET migrate. When you run that, it goes and changes the project files over to the other format. So I know there were some people trying to use Visual Studio 2017, and that's totally fine. That's actually what I'm using at work. It's the Community Edition 2017 Visual Studio. And that .NET migrate command, if you run that either in PowerShell, I think there's also a way you can right-click and do it in Visual Studio. I still have a lot of trouble getting Visual Studio to do what I want day to day. So I open up the either PowerShell or the command prompt and run the commands directly if I can't get Visual Studio to do what I want. But the .NET migrate command does exist on Windows as well, because the .NET command line is on both platforms. And if you're ever wondering what you can do, and this is how I discovered I could create the auth app on the Mac, if you just keep running larger and larger versions of the command, and with a -help, it gives you more and more specificity as to what command can do. So that's how I found out the .NET new help. That's what then told me that, oh, I'm within a .NET project. So other fun thing about it, the command line interface changes if you're in a project or not in a project. In this case, this is how I figured out what could happen. So if you're in a folder that doesn't have any .NET application yet, you can run that help command and it will tell you the types of projects you can create on the platform you're on. Windows can do more currently than the Mac one can. But what I went and created was that MVC, as you saw. So then I did MVC help. And that is what informed me. It had an optional argument, off, and this individual authentication. that's how I went and figured that out. So you can find a lot of things out by just asking your command line client for help. We usually have enough sort of documentation built in that it can kind of guide you where to go. So back to this what it went and created when we created that command. On the Mac, you use the SQLite. You don't really need to worry about the database it's using. Just so you are aware, if you do check out this code, you'll need to change it to look like it does in the examples you've been checking out from GitHub, from Chris's code. So you'll need to change anywhere that it says SQLite, you'll need to make sure you update it the exact opposite way that I did. You need to make sure that it uses SQL Server if you want to actually check out this code and run it. Or if you're lucky enough, you already have SQLite installed on your laptop and it will just kind of work. But I don't know if you'll be that lucky. You might be lucky enough to just run build project and it will work out of the box. I don't know. I haven't ran this yet on a Windows machine. But I wanted to cover what this builds for you. So this Entity Framework example.db. So when you run that command, it goes and creates. Then you have this database file, puts it out right there. I should have my database viewer. Right now. It's on the lower screen. Well, this will be easier. I'm going to open the database. So take just a moment. I could figure out how to click. So I haven't created a user yet. I don't know if this zooms in. I know there's a way to zoom. What is that? Oh, it's equal. Oh, well, there we go. So by default, it goes and creates this user table that has a whole bunch of extra stuff that you're not necessarily, one of the advantages of using the framework, so we just build things out for you, is it will go and create a bunch of things that you don't have to think about. So you don't have to think about this password hash, the phone number. We'll go and do that for you. In order for that to work, I had to run the .NET. So I ran this migrations command, same thing that you needed to do in order to have your database have anything in it. So I ran the migration, which generates this migrations folder that then has all this bonus stuff. So this goes and creates a bunch of classes you never really need to look at that go and define your database. And the second command to run was the database update. That ran the scripts to create everything in the database. Now what I wanted to show you here, so what you get out of the box are this application user that inherits from another identity user object. Oh, well, we can't click anymore. That's too bad. But much like we had to, in our app, create that default constructor that had that DB context, our class for our context, and then options. Same thing auto-generates here for you. It is a requirement in the MVC framework that when you have your DB context, that's how it gets set up. Then you don't really need to worry about this part. Actually doing anything differently than what it would normally do, just stubs it out, so if you do want to make changes, you can. So then over here in our account controller, this is where oh, that's right. Go to hide all. So the account controller automatically gets set up with its sort of default constructor, but automatically out of the box has all of your things that you would want to create an account. So the last thing I'll show you before we get to the set of studios is that out of the box, if you use that user login, you get a whole lot for free. So I can come in here, I can register. And if you're curious where that's set, so if you're wondering what are the password requirements, why are they there? That works as you would so we have a set password view model. That then goes and tells me and it uses this data type password. And it's called confirm password. So sure. So then it already has my user there. We can come on over to the database now. What keyboard? Oh. think I have the same problem where the database isn't where I think it is. But much like the other one, you can go kill it, restart it. Once it restarts, the data is still persistent, I'm still logged in, and I still have the user that I've created. Then I can come in here and it goes unless you add a bunch of things automatically. And because this is still the sort of default what's been created out of the box, it does link you to if you wanted to do other types of logins like Twitter or Facebook. Leads you to an article there. Now that we've taken that really great detour, we are going to start on going over what will be the studio and assignment. So this is part 1 of 3. So you'll want to go and check this out, just like all the other studios, and then there will be part 1, 2, and 3. The goals for tonight, part 1, basically did in the prep material, this persisting of a class. I mean, it is sort of exactly what we did for the class. We'll put the view model in there, add that in. It's effectively the prep work. So you'll want to really, for tonight, do part 1 and part 2. And then Monday we will do part 3. And part 2 is setting up the one-to-many. And the goal is to make sure that you do this on, you can do it with someone else. You are encouraged always to work in groups, but not to necessarily copy what you've already seen in the prep work, but try to actually work through it looking at documentation and what you can sort of find, but try not to copy directly what is already in the prep work. So this is a goal, sort of, everyone's fairly familiar at this point what the cheese MVC is and the relationships between them. So the goal is that you'd be able to build these out. And you're free to continue if you want. If you get done with part 2 and you want to go to part 3, you are free to do that. But that is the goal for tonight, is to get as far on part 1 and 2 of this as you can. And then Monday we'll begin on part 3 after the start. Are there any questions on anything before we get started? If you have any questions about Entity Framework, anything like that, I'm happy to answer them.
I might have said this already, but is this what we're going to turn in instead of the MVC persistent?
Instead of the MVC persisted assignment that was out there, what is actually listed now? If you come out here and you go to classes, is cheese MVC persistent, which then tells you the goal is to do the studio. So if you were working ahead, that's unfortunate. Now you get to the studio. But if you're anything like me, you didn't work too far ahead, feel free to stay in here. Go to the room over there if in here is not to your liking. We can make the room warmer now. if you would prefer. All right, everybody get together and work. You're allowed to talk. You can make noise. It was very quiet on Monday.